everyone, welcome back to the garden. Today I'd like to talk about gardening on a budget. Many of you over the years have asked me how much it costs me to do my projects, to fill up containers or a new border. And the cost of plants varies a lot depending on where you live, of course, and how large your projects end up being. But I still think that it might be helpful for me to share the tips and tricks and the things that I do in my own garden to bring the cost of projects down. So without further ado, here are the tips and tricks. Tip number one will probably not come as a surprise, and it is growing from seed. Just for a couple of pounds, euros, or dollars, you can get a packet of seed and grow many plants out of it. Of course, you can also seed swap with your family, with your neighbors, with your friends. You can harvest your own seeds over the years if you don't grow hybrid varieties. Once you harvest seeds from your own crops, for example, it's the type of thing that you buy once and then can enjoy forevermore if you want to grow every year the same variety. Seeds typically store very well in dark, dry conditions and can keep for many years. The only thing you have to be mindful of is that the germination rate might go down over the years. But still, you can go on without buying seeds for a really long time after that initial purchase. Growing from seed might save you money, but likely not time, because whilst the act of seed sowing itself is pretty quick, it just takes a couple of minutes per flats. Then it's all about growing the seedlings and giving them the right conditions, potting them on, and then finally transplanting them. And that process can take sometimes a couple of months or even a year if you're growing biennial. So you also have to be ready to invest the time. And that's always the trade-off, really, time versus money. I do grow a lot of plants from seed every year, typically annuals, or of course anything that's a vegetable, or biennials, because it's very cost effective if you already have a little bit of equipment. So old containers or a seed starting kit. I actually published recently a video all about seed starting, so go check it out. It's pretty easy and you don't require a lot of equipment to be successful. If you find growing from seed too time consuming, you can also buy plug plants. And this is what I've done here in the border beside me. I've bought some small perennials in small containers pretty early on in the season, and they grow absolutely fast. As soon as the temperatures warm up and you fertilize them, they just boom. And for me, just in a matter of weeks, everything was flourishing, had tripled in size, and that's another really cost-effective way to fill up your borders. That way you reduce literally by a third or a fourth the cost of purchasing a single plant. That's non-negligible, especially when you need, dozens to fill up a border. You can buy more for the same budget, and it's not as time-consuming as growing things from seed. Also, there's a range of perennials that will take you several years before the flowers can bloom, so that's again an even longer time investment. I think definitely plug plants are a good middle ground if you're not quite ready to invest time seed sowing but still want beautiful plants in your garden. I think it's more worth it though if they're not annual, so more focus on perennials over a small shrub that are going to grow quickly. Maybe annuals in your area that you need to sow pretty early on, for example like eggplants / aubergines or tomatoes or peppers that probably need to be sowed indoors or with some heat. And if you don't have the equipment or don't have space indoors or don't want to just fuss about with a bunch of seedlings, that might be a good option. So I have used plug plant extensively over the years, and especially in the new border that I already mentioned, and it worked well. Actually, if you have missed it, I just filmed the garden tour where I show you all the progress of how all those plug plants and the plants that we planted are growing, and both in containers and in the ground, everything is thriving. So if you want to see what the garden looks like in June, absolutely, you should totally check it out. If you want instant impacts in your garden, it might be more tempting to buy a plant that's more mature or nearly its fully grown size, and that's absolutely the case. The one thing that I would add to that is make sure you pick vigorous plants or plants that are well suited to your climate, to your area, and obviously to the location where you want to plant them in your garden. A happy plant will be a plant that you won't have to replace. I also would pick something that spreads easily, for example, if you want to fill up a corner with just a few plants. Something like Japanese anemones, for example, are well known for spreading around. or plants that will self-seed really generously, like foxgloves, like borage, that are a little bit on the wilder side. That way, you just have less plants to buy to fill up an area. I would do the same also for spring bulbs, for example. Just go for varieties that naturalize well, that you can plant once and that have a higher chance of returning year on year in your garden. So things like daffodils and muscari, for example, are great options for that. Another way to save cost on plant is to buy bare root. That's especially the case for trees and perennials and shrubs like roses, for example. They take very well to be planted bare root, typically between November and March, so that they wake up in their new location in the spring. And you typically get great success with that, and it really reduces the cost of plants. That's what I've done for all the roses that I have in my garden. I buy them bare root. You do have to plant them pretty quickly after they're delivered, but then, you know, the plants establish much quicker and are much more robust in the first years. Another thing you can do to multiply your plants year on year is to take cuttings or divide them. Some plants like hostas, for example, like sedum or like geraniums, take very kindly to be divided, and actually that's something that's actively encouraged so that the plant stays healthy and just keeps growing. So again, if you pick something that can be divided, you can stretch that budget. You can also take cuttings from things like dahlias, for example, or divide any tuberous plants. They're pretty easy to divide normally. You can take cuttings from a range of shrubs like roses, like hydrangeas, and lavender also, rosemary, and in a couple of years you can really multiply your crop. I've never done it personally, but this is definitely something I want to try. Buy plants that are going to multiply and be happy in your area, or plants that you can divide and get more off of from one purchase. That's ideal. Hey Simba, you helping us for the video? Do you have a tip? One of the biggest costs in my garden is compost, because I've never had enough space to make my own, except for when we were growing at the allotment, but that wasn't something that I could bring back easily in my garden. And I've actually never really mastered the art of composting, but in this new garden, I really want to change that and set up a composting area so that, you know, I can reduce my costs and also valorize a lot of my kitchen waste. I could buy compost in bulk, that would be pretty cheap, but still there's so much garden debris and weeds and things that can go into the compost that I'm gonna give it a try and report back and see if I actually manage that. One thing that I would say though is that if you have any diseases in your garden, so any kind of fungi, so for example leaf spot disease for your roses, you shouldn't put any infected greens in that compost, because all you're going to achieve is spread that disease around in your garden. So still discard to your recycling center or burn any infected material. Actually, I'll link below a video from Charles Dowding about composting, because I think this is exactly the kind of advice that I want to follow, and is really good at what he does. I think definitely making compost would help. I hope that I'm going to be able to produce enough, but at least that will be one way to reduce that kind of spend. And in the same idea of making your own, I think fertilizer has to be another way to save money, especially because we have a lot of leaves in the garden that fall from the neighboring trees, and you could create something that's called leaf mold. So you just collect all the leaves, put them in bin bags, and then literally just leave them to rot away, and that creates that really rich earth that you can then mix up with compost and use to feed your garden beds. So I'm definitely gonna try that. And also, we live in a pretty rural area, so there are a lot of horse riding centers around. So I'm gonna reach out and see if I could get some of that horse manure, and again, leave it to rot and to mature in the garden. And again, instead of buying it, just trying to source it for free. Apparently you can leave nettle in water, and it's just gonna create that really concentrated fertilizer that you can then dilute and use on your crops. So another thing that I'm gonna try. That's all about lowering what you purchase and reducing your impact that way. And garden waste can be useful not only to make compost, but also for other things that you need in your garden, like mulch, for example. You can definitely use grass clippings, for example, to mulch your flower bed. That's really important to help suppress weed, retain moisture, and it eventually ends up feeding the soil. So that's something that I do personally. I like using bark mulch because it lasts quite well during the season, but you could also use things like grass clippings, shredded leaves, old compost, anything that you can get your hands on. And I would also totally ask your neighbors if you can collect their leaves and use that, for example, or get their grass clippings. And that way you won't have to purchase those things again. I also keep some corners of my garden wild. It's great for wildlife, the cats love it, and also it's less maintenance. And overall, it means that I don't have to purchase plants for the area or hardscape it. So I would definitely encourage you to start a wildflower meadow in a corner of your garden, or just introduce plants that are going to self-seed and spread and that you don't have to purchase again. That's actually one of my favorite gardening projects that I've ever done, creating wildflower meadows. So I'll leave a playlist if you want to try that. All that it will cost you is a little bit of time and a couple of packets of seeds, and you'll have a lovely area full of colors, and that will help pollinators. I also love using reclaimed and recycled materials and secondhand things, so specifically for planting, for example. I love repurposing things, but that can be the case also for anything like garden furniture or garden tools. There's a range of things that you can buy secondhand, and that will lower your investment cost. I typically used to go to car boot sales, for example, but you could go to reclamation yards or salvage yards. Just go at garage sales, and you'll be surprised by the good deals that you can make there. And also on plants sometimes. If you're building raised beds also, for example, using reclaimed materials or repurposed materials can be a really great way, of course, to reduce costs. Again, it's about the choice of plants, but make sure you pick something that carries several seasons of interest. So beautiful spring blossoms, some interesting fruit in the summer, beautiful autumn color, and then a lovely structure for winter. That way you purchase one tree, one plant, and you have interest for 4 seasons. And I would also say that if your garden budget is limited, I would gear it towards more buying evergreens, for example, that will still look good in winter, so that you don't end up with just a summer garden and nothing to look at over winter. So in that frame of mind, for example, if you want a purple, tall, spiking interest, I would pick lavender over sage, because you cut back sage over winter as soon as it's done blooming, and it kind of disappears into your mulch. Whereas lavender will stay, even when you shear it back, will stay as a nice small rounded shrub with silvery foliage, and will be something really lovely to look at winter, as opposed to nothing and a plant that will regrow from scratch the next year. This is actually part of a series of tips that I've shared about making the most of a small garden. So if that's your case, you have a small space, a small garden, a small balcony, check out that video, because I think the tips will be helpful too. Of course, you can always buy plants on sale, or obviously find ways to get them for free. So we've talked about, asking your family, your friends, your neighbors if they have extra plants. But actually, sometimes your local council, if they plant up some containers or some areas, might have some spare plants. Actually, my mother-in-law gave me a bunch of plants that she got from the council where she lives. This is really not very glamorous. It's still in the plastic bag that I got them in, but I have some carex, some Virginia, some sedum over here. Over here I have another crate with a tiarella, some Dusty Miller. I think this is a gem. So they keep changing the planting at every season. So they have planting for spring, for summer, then for fall and for winter. So they plant up throughout the year. And so some of the plants, even if they're still good, get discarded. And she got a bunch for free, and she got me some. So find out in your town, in your city, who's in charge of planting, and you might have a surprise. You might figure out that they actually need people to get those plants off of their hands every time they swap the planting. So that's one tip for you. It's okay for the garden not to be perfect all the time, and definitely I'm taking my own garden one project at a time, one planting area at a time, and that the gardens are never perfect. They're a work in progress. So, it's okay to keep working at it little by little and as your budget allows. Really great gardens take years to develop. And I think that's part of the fun too, that the garden keeps changing and you keep adding to it and editing it. It's just fun. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and do let us know in the comments below if there's anything else that you're doing in your own spaces just to save on plants and just get more for your money. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Hello, Precious. You're tired from filming, Precious?